My name is Saint Riot, and what I do is I make builds in Elden Ring that are fun or silly or unique or just cool. And then I make the build and then I do invasions with it, and then I record what happens in the invasion so that you can see it. And that's my whole thing. And YouTube said you liked it, so they showed you this. And, yeah. Now this build right here, I haven't used this build in a minute. And this build is a strength build, as you can tell by the big heavy weapon. I also have a good amount of endurance, as you can tell by the big heavy armor. And that big heavy armor has given me poise. And what that does is it allows me to make trades, like a vendor, at the flea market, at the swap meet. I can swing my weapon and you can hit me, and I won't stop swinging, but you will. But here's the thing. Take a look at that weapon that I'm using down there in the bottom left, or there on the top left now. I haven't used this build in a while, and I'm looking at my talismans and I'm looking at my weapons, and I'm like, alright, what was up with this build? Well, this build has like 30 points of arcane. And most of my weapons are bleed infused. And I typically use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. But now I don't know how the last time I played with this build, it's been a minute. I don't know how that invasion ended. But I ended up having those talismans on, and so I was a little confused when I started doing invasions. I was like, what does this build do? And now you can see there some pretty good damage on the weapons, right? That running attack did like 600 damage, which is pretty good. So I wasn't thinking anything of it. But I'm supposed to be using bleed weapons on this build. And I totally forgot that. And let's see if you can spot the moment where I remember what this build actually does. You might be asking yourself, Saint, how many builds do you have that this is a problem? That you forget what build you're playing with? And the answer to that question is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40 builds. Too many. Too many builds. I've got like 4 PlayStation profiles, and a lot of them have 10 builds a piece on them. Some have more than 10. Elden Ring will let you have 10. So I've got the PS5 version of the game and the PS4 version of the game. So I'll have 10 on the PS5 version, and then I'll have 4 or 5 on the PS4 version. And then I've got, 4 profiles with that going on, right? So in the neighborhood of like 40 builds or something. It's really absurd. It's pretty crazy. But yeah. So we've got this really fun dungeon invasion. I love invading in these dungeons. Especially a lot of the later game dungeons, because they sort of have a maze quality to them, a labyrinthian quality. That I think is kind of, I don't hear anybody talk about this, but it's something that's really cool, I think. Obviously, as you get further into the game, the dungeons are going to have, stronger monsters with more health to become more difficult. But a really interesting thing that these dungeons do is they also become more difficult to navigate, and that becomes a part of the difficulty in these later game dungeons. And that's just one of those things that I don't hear anybody ever talk about it, but From Software deserves credit for that, because it's such a fun, clever way to up the difficulty of a dungeon, is to make it harder to navigate, make it harder to just get through it. Not just because there's tougher monsters, but because, it's just legitimately more difficult to find your way out of here. But I love these. I love these invasions very much. They are a lot of fun. The open world invasions, a lot of the times, can kind of be a slog. But these dungeon invasions, it always feels like something's happening. Even if it's just you kind of setting a trap somewhere, you know? These moments right here where there's a break in the fighting. In the open world invasions, these moments can feel like they take an eternity. And I think part of that is because you don't know where your opponent is wanting to go, or if they ever even want to go somewhere at all. They might just be content standing here fighting invaders, you know? Whereas when you invade somebody in a dungeon, it feels like they're trying to get through the dungeon. It feels there's only one way to go, you know, and that's the direction of progress, forward. And so these dungeon invasions, even when they have these little breaks in the fighting like this, it doesn't feel like this is my life now. When you get an open world invasion, it feels like, okay, this is just my life now. You might have noticed we have figured out that this is a bleed build at this point in the invasion, and suddenly we are much better off than we were in terms of, you know, damage and stuff like that. Unfortunately, the floor trap that shoots those arrows manages to just bite us in the ass in the worst possible way. And I think we're out of flasks here. But we have a good amount of FP left, so we can throw down another warming stone and regain some health. But we're very low on health. And as a result, our opponents they're coming back to kill me. They sense weakness. There's blood in the water. And they're going to try and kill me. This is good, actually. You know, having low health is almost like bait, right? Sometimes you can just purposefully not heal in an invasion in an effort and an attempt to lure your opponent into sensing weakness so that they can come back and try and, you know, take advantage of that. But what you're really doing is you're playing them. You're going to punish their hyper-aggression. And that's what has happened here, as you can see. And that's the build. And I you know, maybe you remember this, but I didn't. Stamp sweep. Blood infused. That's instant bleed out. That's GG's. You know. Now, it's not that's not easy to hit somebody with. But if you do hit somebody with it, that's pretty much all she wrote. Especially depending on how much armor they're wearing. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody not wearing a lot of armor get hit with a bleed build, but it's pretty disgusting. See? Guy, yeah. Jeez. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, I appreciate you watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Later, y'all.